I'm Ben Folds. I'm a piano player. I'm a songwriter. And for the last 8 years, I've been a passionate advocate for the arts because I realized what it's done for my life. Luckily, I found myself in a great group called Americans for the Arts who have been doing this very thing for years. And it has given me a platform and a system and a lot of knowledge of how arts funding and how arts works in the world in general. So I'm sitting with Bob Lynch of Americans for the Arts, and I've asked him, pulled him over in the hall, and begged him if he could just come in for a conversation to better frame what this podcast is going to be all about. So he is my interviewer now.
My name is Bob Lynch, and I am here today as the president and CEO of the Americans for the Arts Action Fund. But I'm really a piano player who's written a couple of songs, except that I took a detour 45 years ago to get into this work of advancing the arts, all arts, through the vehicle of political action to get more resources for the arts in our country. And so what's really exciting right now is that Ben Folds, who has been somebody wonderfully lending his artistry to us for some 10 years now, has come on to the board of directors of our Arts Action Fund and has agreed to chair our efforts this year, this election year, in the ArtsVote 2020 efforts that include a variety of things going to both the Democratic Convention and the Republican Convention, where Ben joined us at both of those 4 years ago, and also along the trail to different states, including Iowa, when the Iowa State Fair happens, and a variety of other intersections with these presidential candidates. But one great idea, and Ben agreed to chair it, and this was his idea, was to do a series of podcasts with each presidential candidate. In all of the past years, we get each candidate to fill out a survey. We've had great success, and now we're taking it a step further, trying to get each of them to do a podcast. So let me just ask Ben, why are we doing this?
Well, it was, it's notable that when you see the candidates speak on all the issues, that arts doesn't come up. And the more work I do in this area, the more I'm convinced of the importance of investing in the arts. The arguments are so thorough and deep as to what it does for the economy, what it does for health, what it can do for things that you haven't thought about, like returning veterans, music and arts, education, school. It's endless. And yet the candidates, have a pretty full plate, and it's understandable why that's not the first thing out of their mouth. But I thought, if I'm going to know where they stand on the arts, the best chance I've got is to actually get myself in a room as a citizen and ask them and hear it in person and spread that word for them. We doubt they're going to walk out on the debate stage, but we're trying to get them to walk out on the debate stage and bring up the arts. But if they don't, they've brought it up to us now, and we can tell people where they stand, and we can put this podcast out. And that's where that came from.
One of the things you mentioned, them not necessarily mentioning the arts. Yeah. And I think that's a key thing. We want to get the arts to be part of the agenda. And there's a lot of practical reasons, and we'll come to that in a second. But the first thing that comes to my mind simply is the pure joy and involvement of the arts. That is why you yourself are a musician, and how many of them actually have a little bit of that in their lives. And even so, we don't hear about it very much. Right. A couple of ones that you've actually worked with over the years. You want to talk about that? Right.
Well, and speaking to John Delaney first to start this out, found out he was on the board of the National Symphony Orchestra. He's not a musician himself, loves music, has 4 daughters. I think it's always compelling. Parents know how important the arts are. I sat with Mike Huckabee for better part of a day at the Republican National Convention, and we talked about the arts and the importance of the arts. And he's very articulate about what it does for the economy, as well as he's a very spiritual man. He likes to talk about that as well. What I've really been impressed with since being on this journey with you is that the support of the arts and the importance of the arts is not a partisan issue, and it's not terribly controversial. What becomes difficult is that it gets lost in the shuffle, and it's not often framed or understood. That it squares so well with my experience being a touring musician and seeing, for instance, parts of town revitalized by the arts. And they call them the cultural creatives, right? And I think that that's something that maybe some more business-oriented people want to seriously take a look at. And I'd like to think that we're investing our money in that. So all the politicians that we've talked to, even if they're not musicians or dancers or artists themselves, they really do understand the importance of it. The problem is framing it, the pressure, and actually doing what you have to do with anything that is of importance. You have to invest in it.
You know, when you talk about the economics, it's a really interesting dilemma in a way for artists, and some of these candidates, I think, understand this. The whole point of the arts is the joyful part, the harmony, all of that, and a lot of times people are maybe reluctant, let's say a politician, to get into talking about that because it sounds too soft.
Too touchy-feely.
So at the same time,
I find that for myself, honestly. Yeah.
But for the last couple of decades, Americans for the Arts and the Americans for the Arts Action Fund have looked at the other side and found that there's a lot there, the economics. And we know now that if you put the nonprofit arts and the for-profit arts together, our own federal government pegs that at $764 billion gross domestic product. It's huge.
Yeah.
And but if you talk too much about that, a lot of times artists
Can you compare that for like punters, people who are, say, fans of my music, and we're just all citizens that don't know statistics like GDP and stuff? Could you put that in a little more perspective, those numbers?
Sure. So when you add up all of the output, the economic output of all of these industries, from craft to folk music to Hollywood to Broadway, all of that, you add up all of that economic output, and it's $764 billion.
Right.
That figure alone is, for context, it's 4.4%. Basically of our economy.
That would seem huge.
Huge.
Well, especially when you see what our investment is. That is, I'm going to sound like an infomercial, but isn't that a great deal? that we can put so little into something. That's my experience in my life. If I want to invest in something that I know is safe, I put it into my ideas and I put it into art.
You do. Just another bit of context on that. That translates into 4.6 million jobs. Now that's a lot of jobs, a lot of jobs out there. But you know this from being a touring musician, that when you tour, it's not just you touring.
That's correct.
You got other musicians, you got tech people, there's people selling T-shirts and vendors of all kinds there, and there are people parking.
That's correct. Absolutely. That's something that's blown me away is I see the news like everyone. You read the news and you think about what happens in the economy from year to year. But when you're in a lot of it looks dark because that's usually what we're the most interested in. But what I found as a touring musician is more than not all these little sections of town. Sometimes they're little rural towns with one little old theater. I've seen those go from almost inhabitable neighborhoods to being very interesting, diverse. I wouldn't call them gentrified. I would call they are really interesting, diverse parts of town brought together by the arts, usually by a theater that has been revitalized. And then suddenly, and then there's a cafe next to it, and then there's a used shop across the street, and then there's a gallery down the street, and all these things start to. And you think about these people, they drive in that night. So where are they driving from? Because they don't all live in this town, and they've come from somewhere else, and they're spending their money on dinner and all these things. And it took me 25 years for the penny to drop to realize why these parts of town are now really beautiful, diverse, interesting, artistic parts of town that people would want to live in. Soon they become a place that big business wants to invest in.
And one of the things that you point out there about people coming from out of town, we know from our own research that 1/3 of the audience of the average arts event comes from out of town. Probably even more to your events. They're coming longer. Yeah. But 1/3, and that 1/3 spends more money, probably twice what the local resident
spends. Yeah, the remote.
That
makes sense.
They have to. Yeah. And they often stay longer and put a little more income into the pockets of local people. So, I'd love to just chat a little bit about a few other areas beyond the hard and wonderful economic and jobs argument, which incidentally is the number one thing that we are asked by any politician that we're talking to, federal, state, or local, when we're saying we'd like to see more investment in the arts.
Right.
The number one thing is they want to know the numbers. But then other things that we've been seeing a lot recently are things that are about social impact. How can the arts help change for the better different parts of our communities and our nation? One example, I'd love your thoughts on this one, is how the arts are a mechanism in a time when America seems so far apart. The people seem so far apart, to bring people together and get them to understand each other in a better way. We want to ask the candidates about that, but I'd love your thoughts about what you've seen yourself.
Well, I think it's very tricky. And I mean, it comes back to that original point of how difficult it is to talk about the arts, because even art itself, as a form of, I believe, higher communication, poetic communication, can itself be divisive. And so I think they've got a real challenge, and we always have a real challenge to say, if we're going to say we're going to involve the arts in this event this year, if you were a mayor, well, whose music do you choose? That can become its own fight. We've become that tribal. But I have to believe that if we allow ourselves to be so divided in such a unifying force as the arts, that we really realize we have something to heal, and the arts would be a good place to start. It's hard to know how to talk about them. I think that is the biggest problem. So the arts, and maybe someone thinks that means some kind of real highbrow arts. To me, the arts is all encompassing. It's Beyonce, it's Miley Cyrus, fine. It's also arts and craft. It's dance, and not necessarily something that's set up to be some weird dance that someone does in your face. I think that is the challenge, and that's what we have. That's the code we have to crack. I'm always down for people to tweet me. They can tell me why the arts are important in that many characters, and it's compelling because we know that it is. But if they can boil this down a little bit for us, maybe someone comes up with something.
I think that one of the big mysteries of the arts is that the arts are all around us.
Yep.
We know that half the American population actually does something in the arts. They make things. However, I think there's an awful lot that you as an artist, and in these kinds of interviews, you can do to point out what I call the blinding flash of the obvious. And an example would be, we have a piece of fiber art that we revere. It's called the flag. We have songs that we think passionately about. We call them anthems.
Right.
We're doing a lot of work with the military these days, and I never thought in my early interest in the arts, which was through rock and roll, that it would have anything to do with the military. But it turns out that the military spends way more than our country spends on the arts, because they know it's a winner of a solution.
It's a motivator, and it's a morale lifter. Absolutely.
But it's also something, and maybe you could talk a little bit about this, it's also something that all politicians care about.
Right.
They whether they are Republican or Democrat, they care about a safe America. They value the military. They want the military wounded to be healed, and they're discovering that not only are the arts a great patriotic motivator on one end, but they're a healer on the other end. And any thoughts from your own audience experiences related to or art therapy knowledge about what we might want to be emphasizing a little more related to the arts?
Well, I think you're bringing up healing veterans is a big one. Everyone's got a story, and goodness knows someone that comes back from defending the country is going to have some stories. And it's also about getting your feelings out. A lot of these guys don't want to come back. A lot of these guys and girls don't want to come back and necessarily talk to a therapist all the time. That's somehow, maybe it's confronting, or they just don't feel right. That's not their cup of tea. Find so many of them like music. The idea that this could be translated into a song, and there are songwriters out there who have been willing to sit with vets and hash it out as a song. Maybe they can play it and sing it. Maybe someone else plays it and sings it. But that's magical to see that come to life. And it's really, I can tell you as a musician who's written songs my whole life, It's cathartic. You can move on sometimes. You get it out there, and we all know that. Music therapy is so misunderstood or perhaps just understood, that there's a lot of science, neurology, and a lot of a big wing of music therapy. If you look at Gabby Giffords, the congresswoman who was shot and nearly killed, shot in the head, didn't know if she could speak. Music therapy was given a lot of credit because Megan Mora, who we both know, was flown in to work with her, and she got her speech back. And I think that's certainly better. If you can use that over a lot of drugs, it should be insured. That's music for healing.
It reminds me too, for me personally, the most meaningful experience in the arts that I had in the last 2 years has to do with very modest musical efforts that I got to participate in as a very modest guitar player at the Hell's Bottom VFW in Tacoma Park, Maryland. And they got a big flag that says Hell's Bottom VFW, and I have my picture in front of it with my guitar, so I feel really good. But the thing is that we met some of the artists who had been military wounded over at Walter Reed through a program called Music Corps. Yo-Yo Ma was a speaker for us. Great. We worked with them, got to know some of those musicians. And then with the good folks at the National Endowment for the Arts, who fund their military program called Creative Forces, a couple of the folks from the NEA, a couple of folks from NPR, myself, and some of these veterans played a few times over there at the Hell's Bottom VFW, and with a wonderful riveted audience and a backup band that was 3 Vietnam-era acid rock musicians, and it's the best nights ever. But it is illustrating the fact that that's not really art therapy right there. That's just art as a healing. That's art as a healing. Yeah. But the guys from Walter Reed had gone through art therapy through the Creative Forces program of or funded by that. And one of the things that I found through that was some of the great supporters that we don't know who are there, admirals and generals. Mrs. Karen Pence, the wife of the vice president, has only one issue, and it's art therapy that she works on. Good. And she's actually an art teacher and teaching in a school. So there's friends and patrons of the arts everywhere, but they're hidden. Right. And we have to pull them out.
Yeah, I think it's the reluctance sometimes to come out and speak about the arts is probably one. There's a tribal issue there that supposes that it's the left that's more concerned about the arts. I've found maybe evidence to the contrary sometimes, in that my friends who are the biggest contributors in terms of just giving money to the arts have actually been more conservative in their politics than some of the people that I know on the left side. They just express it in a different way. Maybe some of the reluctance is that it sounds as though sometimes people feel like maybe it's not their arts. It's like the arts. It's like, oh, yeah, the arts. I like music. I like movies. The arts, that's someone else's. And what can be done about that? I don't think anything. I think it's just that we have to keep talking about it.
So somewhere in the office here at the Americans for the Arts Action Fund headquarters is a shrine to Ben Folds, because you're revered for all of the great things that you've done with us and for us. And I mentioned some of them at the beginning of this, but our National Arts Policy Roundtable you've participated in, our National Policy in Public Policy in the Arts Lecture, you've helped us with that. Arts Advocacy Day, you've helped us with that. Past political campaigns and efforts, fly-ins, all of these things. So all of that is greatly, greatly appreciated. But you are putting in an enormous amount of time in this particular effort. There's some 24 candidates now, Republican and Democrat. Right. Who knows, there may become 30 by the time we're done. You're going to try to reach them all. What are the big things you want to see come out of this? Big things for Americans for the Arts, let's say, big policy things, or for yourself?
Well, some of it is for myself. Is the way I, the way I approach anything is I follow my interest, and I find when I'm interested in something, people who listen to my music often are as well. And it's of interest to me where these politicians stand. I feel an opportunity for us to evolve some in the next political cycle. Ironically, it feels like there is an alternate universe aside from the circus that we see every day that's very enlightened. So I want people who are interested in the things that I'm interested in to hear it. And I figure the only way I can do it is to go in as a citizen and as almost as a reporter and an interested friend to go in and hear them out. I also hope that they take away with them perhaps some of the facts and from your experience, from American for the Arts experience, because you've got decades in understanding how to frame this and knowing the economics of it and what works and what doesn't. I hope that they walk away with that. God knows that they get their heads packed with all kinds of other policy. I hope they get that. And I hope that we get lucky and they bring something up in public, and I would hope that our audience that listens to this podcast will then pressure these same candidates to take a stand on the arts, do it through tweet. I'll retweet the stuff, and I think all the candidates would be very excited to hear from you.
And that is great. And I'll just add to that what I'm hoping that America can get out of this with working with you and the Americans for the Arts Action Fund is a president who will be a hero for arts education in America.
Me too.
Who will push for more money. I'd love to see $1 per capita, which basically just gets the money for the National Endowment for the Arts back to where it once was with inflation. I'd love to see a tax policy that allows people to continue to be generous in giving. Something I've heard you talk about, which is putting artists to work in a volunteer capacity through something like the Peace Corps called the Artist Corps.
The Artist Corps, I love this idea. This has come up a couple times, and I don't think it's been fleshed out, but I think it's something for us to put into our consciousness now. Think about that. I think people, all the musicians I know and musicians I don't know, and artists of all disciplines, I'd like to put it out there. Artist Corps, what can we do? Like there's all kinds of things you can do. I think of the incredible a cappella community and universities that I've had something to do with for the last decade. And I see a lot of energetic university kids who are really good at working together. They sing in harmony together all the time, and they're volunteers when they are in these a cappella groups. And maybe they're part of the Artist Corps. It doesn't have to be famous artists. Maybe part of the Artist Corps is if you're a parent and you are concerned about your school not being as focused on music, tell the music teacher, if you've got one, or your teacher, that you want to come in with your ukulele and tell the kids about the ukulele. Actually be involved. You don't have to have a website to go to do this. You don't have to have any money. You have to show interest, which is contagious.
You know what that will need? Once you get that up and running, I think it might need a U.S. Secretary of the Artist Corps.
Yeah.
And the name Ben Folds sounds good to me. So, Ben, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Bob. Thank you for listening. Be sure to subscribe today to the ArtsVote 2020 podcast series with Ben Folds on Anchor or any of your favorite podcast apps. Please go to artsactionfund.org/podcast for more info. That's artsactionfund.org/podcast. You'll get more info.